Sarah Chen found them in the eastern ravine, huddled together under a collapsed shelter. 4 creche cubs, their fur matted with dust and dried blood that wasn't theirs. Their golden eyes tracked her every movement as she approached, but they didn't run. They were too young to know they should fear humans, and too traumatized to care. The survey drone had spotted the aftermath of the Pride War 3 days ago. 2 creche prides had torn each other apart over territorial rights to the mineral-rich valley. The adults were all dead. Colony protocol was clear about orphaned predator cubs. Report them to creche authorities or, if that wasn't possible, euthanize them humanely. They couldn't survive alone, and they were too dangerous to relocate. Sarah looked at the 4 small faces staring back at her. The largest cub, almost twice the size of the smallest, growled softly. Protective, not aggressive. She made her decision in that moment, knowing it would probably cost her job. "Come on," she said softly, opening her field pack. "Let's go home." The cubs fit in her transport vehicle barely. They huddled in the back, watching her with those unsettling intelligent eyes that reminded everyone why the creche were classified as a sapient species. Sarah drove back to her habitat unit on the colony's edge, where she worked as a xenobiologist studying local fauna. Technically, creche cubs qualified as local fauna. She named them over the first week. Rakar was the big one, all muscle and awkward movements, like a child who'd grown too fast. This was lean and quick, always moving, always alert. Ven had darker fur and observant eyes, watching everything before acting. And Sora, the smallest, who followed the others around trying to copy everything they did. They ate the protein supplements she provided. They slept in the corner of her lab. They grew. Fast. Within 3 weeks, they doubled in size. Rakar's head reached Sarah's waist. Their baby clumsiness transformed into predator grace. And something else emerged, something Sarah hadn't anticipated. Territorial behavior. It started small. Rakar sleeping across her bedroom doorway. Thys growling when Ven got too close to Sarah during feeding time. Small displays of dominance, natural for any social predator species. Then it escalated. Sarah woke one morning to find Rakar and Thys locked in a standoff in her main room, both positioned between her bedroom door and the lab exit. Their ears were flat, tails lashing. The rumbling growls made her ribs vibrate. "Stop," she said firmly. They separated, but the tension remained. Over breakfast, she noticed they'd divided the space. Rakar stayed near the entrance. Thys claimed the area near the equipment lockers. Ven positioned himself where he could watch the security monitors. Sora tried to stay near Sarah, but the others kept pushing her away. The fights began in the 4th week. Sarah was analyzing soil samples when she heard the crash. She ran into the main room to find Rakar and Thys rolling across the floor, claws out, teeth bared. They moved with terrifying speed, slamming into furniture, knocking equipment off tables. Blood spattered the floor. "Rakar! Thys, stop!" Sarah grabbed the sonic deterrent from her belt and activated it. The high-frequency pulse made both cubs yowl and separate, shaking their heads. "What is wrong with you?" Sarah demanded. But she knew. She'd studied creche social structures for 2 years. Pride hierarchy was established through combat. The strongest earned the right to lead, to protect, to mate. These cubs were approaching adolescence, and their instincts were taking over. They were fighting to determine who had the right to guard her. The problem was, none of them were backing down. The attacks became daily occurrences. Thys would challenge Rakar. Ven would try to assert dominance over both while they were weakened. Even little Sora started lashing out when the others pushed her aside. Sarah's habitat became a war zone. She treated their wounds each night, cuts and bites, mostly superficial but getting worse. They were holding back, some part of their developing minds recognizing her authority, but that wouldn't last. Eventually, their instincts would override everything else. colony security noticed during a routine check. "Dr. Chen, you can't keep 4 adolescent creche in a residential habitat," Security Chief Morrison said, surveying the damage. Scratched walls, broken furniture, claw marks on every surface. "They're becoming dangerous." "They're juveniles," Sarah protested. "They're just establishing hierarchy. They're apex predators who each weigh 60 kilograms and growing. Last week, one of them almost broke through your door. What happens when they're fully grown?" Morrison shook his head. "I'm sorry, Doctor. They need to be relocated to a proper facility, or we'll have to put them down." Sarah felt her chest tighten. "Give me 2 weeks. Dr. Chen." 2 weeks. I'll figure something out." Morrison looked at the 4 cubs, now watching from different corners of the room, and sighed. 2 weeks. But if there's one more incident that damages colony property or threatens safety, they're done. That night, Sarah sat at her console while the cubs prowled their respective territories. Rakkar by the door, Thess near the weapons locker, Ven at the monitoring station. Sora tried to approach Sarah, but Thess growled, sending her scurrying back. Sarah pulled up her research files on creche social behavior. Pages of notes on pride structures, dominance displays, territorial instincts. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: the fighting would continue until one cub decisively dominated the others, or until they all matured enough to leave and form their own prides. Neither option was available. In a confined space, a dominance fight might turn lethal, and she couldn't release adolescent creche into the wild. They'd die or become dangerous to colonists. She watched them on her security feeds, 4 magnificent creatures, trapped by their own instincts. They didn't understand that they could all protect her, that they could work together. They only knew that the strongest earned the right to guard. But Sarah wasn't creche, she was human. And humans had spent millennia figuring out how to make cooperation stronger than competition. She opened a new file and began typing. If creche society was built on dominance, then she'd have to teach them something different. Something that went against every instinct they had, but something that might save their lives. She'd have to teach them to work as a team. Sarah spent 3 days buried in research, barely sleeping. She reviewed every study on creche social psychology, watched hours of footage from wild pride observations, and read the few existing accounts of creche who'd integrated into galactic society. The pattern was always the same. Creche organized themselves through strength. The strongest led hunts. The most aggressive protected territory. The quickest claimed the best hunting grounds. Everything was competition, and competition meant fighting. But there was something else buried in the older research files. Before creche achieved spaceflight, before they unified their clans, their prides had been more specialized. Archaeological evidence showed distinct roles: sentries who watched for danger, hunters who stalked prey, den keepers who maintained safe spaces, and trackers who found food and water. Somewhere in their evolution toward technology and civilization, the creche had simplified. Strength became everything because strength could do anything. But these cubs, orphaned before learning their culture, only had instinct. They knew they should protect Sarah. They didn't know there were different ways to do it. Sarah watched them through her security feeds. Rakkar paced by the entrance, powerful but clumsy, knocking things over as he moved. Thess did rapid patrols, quick and aggressive, wearing a path in the floor. Ven sat by the monitors, watching feeds but not acting on what he saw. Sora followed Sarah everywhere, mimicking the others' protective stances but getting pushed aside. They were all trying to do the same job. No wonder they were fighting. On the 4th morning, another fight erupted. Ven had moved too close to Sarah's bedroom door, entering what Rakkar considered his territory. The big cub lunged, catching Ven by the shoulder and slamming him into the wall. Ven twisted, raking claws across Rakkar's face. Thais saw her opportunity and attacked both of them, trying to establish dominance while they were distracted. The three cubs became a snarling, violent tangle of fur and claws. Sarah activated the sonic deterrent, but Thais was too focused. She'd pinned Ven and was going for his throat. Real threat, not just posturing. "This, no!" Sarah did something stupid. She grabbed This by the scruff and pulled. The young Kresh spun, snarling, and for one terrifying second Sarah saw nothing but teeth and fury. Then recognition hit. This froze. Pupils dilating and jerked away from Sarah like she'd been burned. The cub retreated to the corner, shaking. Sarah's hands trembled. She looked at the three cubs, all wounded, all watching her with something like shame in their eyes. Sora crept out from under a table where she'd hidden. "This has to stop," Sarah said quietly. She pulled up a chair and sat down in the center of the room. After a moment's hesitation, she spoke in Kresh gesture language, supplementing with Galactic Common. Her accent was terrible, but they understood. "Come here, all of you." They approached slowly, warily. Rakar first, always first, then Thais and Ven, keeping distance from each other. Finally Sora, staying low and submissive. "You're fighting because you all want the same thing," Sarah said. "You want to protect me. You want to prove you're strong enough, worthy enough. I understand that." 4 pairs of golden eyes locked on her. "But you're thinking like there's only one job, one position, one winner." Sarah pulled up a hollow screen showing the layout of her habitat and the surrounding colony. "You're wrong." She highlighted different areas: the entrance and outer perimeter, the paths between buildings, the communications hub, the interior of her habitat. "Rakar!" The big cub's ears perked up. "You're the strongest, the biggest, but I don't need you next to me all the time. I need you watching the places where danger comes from, the doors, the perimeter. You're not being pushed away. You're being put where you're most important." Rakar tilted his head, confused. "Thais, you're fast, aggressive. You see threats quickly. I need you checking everywhere I'm going to be before I get there. Scouting, making sure nothing surprises me. That's not a lesser job, it's essential." Theis's tail lashed uncertainly. "Ven, you watch everything. You notice patterns the others miss. I need you monitoring communications, security feeds, analyzing data. You think the others are braver because they act first? They're just louder. You're the one who sees danger before it arrives." Ven's ears came forward slightly. "Sora." The smallest cub looked up, surprised to be addressed. "You're always near me. The others think that means you've won, but they're wrong. I need you learning what I need before I ask for it. Watching me, not just watching for threats, keeping supplies ready. That's not small work, that's essential work." Sarah pulled up another holoscreen. This one showing human military organization charts. Diagrams of squad structures, naval crew assignments, administrative hierarchies. This is how humans work. We're not the strongest species. We're not the fastest or the smartest, but we survived because we learned something. A group working together beats any individual, no matter how strong. She showed them images from Earth's history. Ancient armies in formation, modern emergency response teams, space station crews. Every image showed humans with different jobs, different positions, all working together. You think fighting decides who's worthy? Humans learned that working together decides who survives. Rakar can't do Theis's job. This can't do Ven's job. Ven can't do Sora's job. You need each other. The cubs looked at each other, then back at Sarah. The concept was alien to them. Everything in their instincts said, compete, dominate, establish hierarchy through strength. "I'm asking you to try something different," Sarah said. "Something that might not make sense to you. Trust me. Trust that I know how to build a pride that works." Rakar rumbled, a questioning sound. Sarah activated another screen, showing the security breach that had happened the previous month. A maintenance drone had malfunctioned and nearly crashed into the habitat. If you'd been working together that day, Ven would have seen it on monitors. Theiss would have intercepted it outside. Rakkar would have been the final barrier if it got through. Sora would have been getting me to safety. Instead, you were all fighting over who got to stand closest to me, and I had to handle it myself. Understanding began to dawn in their eyes. Not complete understanding, their instincts were too strong for that, but the beginning of it. 2 weeks, Sarah said. Give me 2 weeks to show you this can work. If I'm wrong, you can go back to fighting. But if I'm right, she looked at each of them in turn. If I'm right, you'll be stronger than any pride in Kresh history. The first day was a disaster. Sarah set up the new system early in the morning. She gave Rakkar a modified scanner that would alert him to any movement near the habitat's external sensors. She synced Theiss's collar to her own location tracker so the quick cub could scout ahead. She configured Ven's station with access to security feeds and communication channels. She gave Sora a basic medical scanner and a supply checklist. Then she tried to go to work. Rakkar refused to stay by the door. He followed her, growling every time she moved toward the exit. When Sarah physically pushed him back to his position, he looked betrayed, ears flat against his skull. Theiss scouted ahead exactly once, then returned and wouldn't leave. The idea of being separated from Sarah, even by 50 meters, made her pace and snarl with anxiety. Ven stared at the monitors for 10 minutes before abandoning the station to join the others clustered around Sarah. Watching from a distance wasn't protecting. Protecting meant being close enough to fight. Sora was the only one who stayed near Sarah willingly, but she had no idea what to do with the medical scanner. She just held it and looked confused. By noon, all 4 cubs were back to their old positions, fighting for space around Sarah. She'd accomplished nothing. That evening, Sarah sat on her floor, exhausted and frustrated. The cubs watched her warily, sensing her disappointment. She'd been so sure this would work. The logic was perfect. But logic didn't account for instinct, and instinct was screaming at them that distance from their human meant failure. Okay, Sarah said finally. New approach. She couldn't fight their instincts directly. She had to work with them, redirect them. If they needed to feel like they were protecting her, she'd have to show them that their assigned roles were protection. She started small. The next morning, Sarah didn't leave the habitat. Instead, she called Rakkar over to the door. Something's outside, she lied, pulling up a false alert on his scanner. Check it. Rakkar's whole body went rigid with focus. He approached the door, scanning, every sense alert. There was nothing there, but he didn't know that. He checked thoroughly, professionally, the way a trained guard would. When he returned to report the all clear, Sarah made a huge fuss. Good work. You found it before it became a problem. I'm safe because of you. Rakkar's tail lifted slightly. Pride. She did the same with Theiss an hour later, asking her to check the route to the lab building before Sarah walked it. Theiss raced ahead, checked every corner, every shadow, and returned. Sarah praised her, thanked her, told her she couldn't have made the walk safely without her. For Ven, Sarah showed him a real security alert from the previous week, a minor glitch he hadn't noticed because he'd been too busy fighting with the others. She explained how, if he'd been watching, he could have warned her. She showed him 3 more incidents from the logs, demonstrating how many threats existed that only monitoring could catch. Ven settled at his station, ears forward. Watching wasn't cowardice. It was seeing danger the others missed. For Sora, Sarah deliberately left her water bottle just out of reach while working. The little cub noticed immediately and brought it. Sarah made it clear how helpful that was, how it let her keep working without interruption. Small wins, but wins nonetheless. The second day went better. Rakkar stayed at his post longer when Sarah actively gave him tasks. Check the door. Scan the perimeter. Report anything unusual. He was still uncomfortable being far from her, but purpose helped. Thais began to enjoy scouting, though she'd rush back immediately after. The movement, the checking, the hunting for threats, it satisfied something in her. She just needed Sarah to acknowledge what she'd done when she returned. Ven discovered something important on the third day. While monitoring communication channels, he noticed a supply delivery had been redirected to the wrong address. He alerted Sarah, who corrected it before the error caused problems. The praise he received was genuine, not manufactured, and something shifted in his eyes. His job was real. It mattered. Sora struggled the most because her role was the hardest to quantify. But Sarah started teaching her to recognize stress signals: rapid breathing, tense muscles, elevated heart rate. When Sora noticed these and responded appropriately, bringing water or activating the room's air circulation, Sarah rewarded her. Slowly, Sora began to understand. She wasn't just staying close. She was monitoring Sarah's well-being in ways the others couldn't. By the end of the first week, they'd stopped fighting entirely. It wasn't perfect cooperation yet. Rakkar still sometimes left his post to check on Sarah directly. This still preferred staying close rather than ranging far. Ven still abandoned his monitors when he got anxious. Sora still didn't fully understand her role. But they weren't attacking each other. The tension had eased. They were beginning to see that they weren't competing for one position. They each had their own. The real test came on day 9. Sarah needed to travel to the colony's central research facility for a mandatory meeting. It was a 15-minute walk through 3 different sections of the colony. Normally, she'd just go, but now she had 4 cubs who thought protecting her was their purpose. "All right," she announced. "We're doing this together. Real-world application." She assigned roles clearly. Ven would monitor her destination, checking communication traffic and security alerts for any problems. Thys would scout the route ahead, marking any obstacles or threats. Rakkar would secure each checkpoint as they passed it, ensuring nothing followed them. Sora would stay with Sarah, monitoring her vitals and carrying supplies. They moved out. It was beautiful to watch. Thys ranged ahead, moving from shadow to shadow, checking corners before signaling the all-clear. Rakkar positioned himself at each junction, watching their rear until they'd passed, then catching up to secure the next point. Ven stayed at the habitat, updating Sarah through her comlink about foot traffic patterns and potential delays. Sora walked beside Sarah, medical scanner active, watching her human with intense focus. They reached the research facility without incident. But more importantly, they reached it working as a unit. In the facility's lobby, Sarah's colleague, Dr. Okafor, stared at the 4 cubs in formation around Sarah. "Chen, what is this?" Sarah smiled. "This is a pride." "This is insane. They're coordinating. I've never seen juvenile creche coordinate." "That's because they're not being creche," Sarah said. "They're being something new." The meeting lasted 2 hours. The cubs maintained their positions throughout. No fighting, no challenges. When Sarah emerged, they fell back into formation for the return trip. That night, Sarah filed her report with Security Chief Morrison. She included video footage of the day's trip. Morrison called her 30 minutes later. "Dr. Chen, I don't know what you did, but those are not the same animals I saw 2 weeks ago." "They were never just animals," Sarah said. "They just needed to learn how to work together instead of against each other. You taught creche cubs cooperative tactics. I taught them that being strong isn't about beating everyone else. It's about making everyone else stronger." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "That's a very human concept." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "It is." She looked at her cubs, each in their position, each watching and waiting and protecting in their own way. They'd finally found what they'd been fighting for all along. purpose. 3 weeks after the system began, each cub had transformed in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. Rakar had stopped being just the biggest cub. He'd become methodical, patient. Every morning he checked the perimeter sensors, tested the door seals, and inspected the habitat's structural integrity. He'd taught himself to read the scanner properly by watching Sarah, and now he could identify different types of movement signatures: animals, drones, people. He knew them all. When a maintenance worker arrived unannounced one afternoon, Rakar was the one who intercepted him at the door before Sarah even knew someone was there. The worker had proper credentials, but Rakar had checked them anyway. Sarah's praise that day had made his whole body vibrate with pride. He was learning that strength wasn't just physical power, it was reliability, being the wall that nothing got through. Thais had become something extraordinary. Her natural aggression had found perfect outlet in scouting. She'd started mapping the entire colony in her mind, learning patterns of movement, identifying which areas had heavy traffic and which were isolated. She'd developed a sixth sense for potential threats. She'd also discovered stealth. Instead of the aggressive posturing she'd relied on before, she'd learned to move unseen. She was so good at it that Sarah sometimes lost track of her, only to have Thys materialize from shadows to report an all clear. The turning point for Thys came when she detected a genuine threat. A feral creature from the planet's wilderness had gotten into the colony's ventilation system. Thais had noticed the unusual sounds while scouting, tracked the creature, and alerted Sarah before it could cause panic. Colony security had been impressed. Sarah had been amazed. Thys finally understood. She wasn't less important for being away from Sarah. She was the reason Sarah could move freely without fear. Ven had become the pride's brain. He'd taken to monitoring with intense focus, learning to read data streams the way others read faces. He could spot anomalies in communication traffic, identify when supply shipments were delayed, and predict when maintenance work might cause disruptions. His breakthrough came during a routine monitoring shift. He'd noticed an unusual pattern in the colony's power grid, small fluctuations that happened at regular intervals. He'd mentioned it to Sarah, who'd passed it to engineering. The engineers had discovered a failing regulator that would have caused a blackout within days. Ven had saved the colony from a serious incident, and he'd done it by watching and thinking rather than fighting. The realization had changed him fundamentally. He'd stopped second-guessing his role. Intelligence was its own form of strength. Sora had perhaps grown the most. Being the smallest, she'd always tried to compensate by being more aggressive, more territorial. Now she'd found something she was better at than any of the others. She could read Sarah. She knew when Sarah was tired before Sarah admitted it. She noticed when Sarah skipped meals. She detected stress in tiny changes of posture or breathing. The medical scanner helped, but Sora's real skill was observation combined with care. She'd started anticipating needs. Water appeared before Sarah got thirsty. The habitat's temperature adjusted before Sarah felt uncomfortable. Supplies were ready before Sarah reached for them. It wasn't magic. It was careful attention and pattern recognition. Sarah had never felt more cared for in her life. The pride had found its rhythm. They moved like parts of a single organism, each performing their function without conscious thought. The fighting had become unthinkable. Why would they fight? They each had something the others couldn't do. Then came the storm. The colony's weather monitoring system had detected it 3 days out, a massive electrical storm with winds strong enough to damage structures. The colony went into preparation mode. Emergency supplies were distributed. Buildings were reinforced. Everyone was ordered to shelter in place. But the storm accelerated. What should have been 3 days became 18 hours. Sarah was in the central research facility when the alert came. The storm would hit in 4 hours. Everyone needed to return to their assigned shelters immediately. The route back to her habitat crossed 2 open areas between buildings. In high winds, those crossings would be dangerous. The cubs went into action. Van immediately accessed the weather data, analyzing wind patterns and the storm's trajectory. He calculated the safest route back, identifying which buildings would provide the best shelter if they needed to stop. "Take the western path," Ven said through Sarah's comlink. "The eastern path will be exposed when the winds shift. You have a 3-hour window." Thais was already out the door, moving fast. She'd scouted the western path twice, checking for debris, loose equipment, or structural damage that might become dangerous in high winds. She found 3 hazards and marked them clearly. Rakkar positioned himself by the facility's exit, ready to move with Sarah. He'd studied the route on his scanner, identifying every door, every shelter point, every potential danger. Sora had gathered emergency supplies: water, nutrition bars, a medical kit, thermal blanket. Everything Sarah might need if they got stranded. The small cub's pack was probably heavier than she should carry, but she refused to leave anything behind. They left the facility as the first winds began to hit. The sky had turned a sickly green color, and the air tasted like metal. The first stretch was relatively easy. The western path took them through a covered walkway between 2 large buildings. Thais had checked it twice, and Rakkar secured their rear as they moved. Then they hit the first open area. The wind had picked up significantly. It pushed against them, making each step difficult. Debris skittered across the ground. Sarah leaned into the wind, struggling forward. Rakkar moved to her windward side, using his bulk to block the worst of it. Sora stayed close on her other side, one paw on Sarah's leg, maintaining contact. Thais ranged ahead, finding the path of least resistance, directing them around obstacles. Ven's voice came through the comm, steady and calm. "Storm acceleration detected. You have 90 minutes before conditions become critical. There's a maintenance shelter at your 2 o'clock if needed." They pushed forward. Sarah's lungs burned. The wind howled. Equipment alarms wailed across the colony as systems automatically secured themselves. Halfway across the open area, something went wrong. A storage container, poorly secured, broke loose from its housing. It tumbled across the ground straight toward them. It weighed at least 200 kilograms, and the wind was driving it like a missile. "Rakkar!" Sarah shouted. He was already moving. The big cub lowered his shoulder and hit the container at an angle, redirecting its path. It slammed past them and crashed into a wall. Rakkar stumbled, shook himself, and returned to position. "Keep moving," Thais urged from ahead. "Clear path for 30 meters." They reached the second covered section. Sarah gasped for breath. They were more than halfway home. "Storm intensity increasing," Ven reported. "Window now 70 minutes. The final open area was smaller but more exposed. The wind had reached dangerous levels. Sarah could barely stand against it. Sora made a decision. She moved in front of Sarah, low to the ground, providing an anchor point. Sarah grabbed her harness, using the cub's stability to keep her own balance. Rakkar stayed close, breaking the wind. Thais found a path between 2 buildings that created a wind channel but reduced crosswind. They moved together, a single unit with a single purpose. A piece of debris flew at them. Rakkar batted it aside. A door blew open ahead. Thais was there instantly, checking for danger before signaling clear. Sarah stumbled. Sora braced, supporting her weight. Ven's voice provided constant updates, guiding them. They reached the habitat with 20 minutes to spare. The door sealed behind them, and emergency shutters activated over the windows. Sarah collapsed on her floor, breathing hard. The cubs gathered around her, checking her, ensuring she was okay. No fighting, no competing. Just 4 beings who'd worked perfectly together to keep her safe. "We did it," Sarah said, looking at each of them, "because you worked together." Rakkar had been the shield. Thais had been the guide. Ven had been the navigator. Sora had been the anchor. No single cub could have gotten Sarah home safely. But together, they'd been unstoppable. That night, as the storm raged outside, the Pride settled into their positions. Rakar by the door, Thys near the weapons locker, Ven at his monitors. Sora curled beside Sarah. But it was different now. They weren't guarding positions. They were fulfilling roles. They weren't competing for Sarah's approval. They'd each earned it in their own way. They'd become what Sarah had promised, stronger together than any of them could be alone. Word spread quickly through the colony. The xenobiologist who'd created a functional creche pride using human organizational principles became the subject of intense scientific interest. Other researchers visited Sarah's habitat to observe the cubs in action. Security personnel studied their coordination. Even the colony administrator came by, curious about what everyone was talking about. Sarah's colleagues were amazed. Dr. Okafor spent an entire afternoon watching the cubs operate, taking notes, asking questions. "This shouldn't work," Okafor said, watching Thys complete a perimeter scout while Ven monitored security feeds. "Creche social structures are based on dominance hierarchies. You've created a cooperative system from predators programmed to compete." "I didn't change what they are," Sarah explained. "I just gave them a framework where competition wasn't necessary. They still want to protect me. They still want to prove their worth. But now they're proving it by being the best at their specific job, not by beating each other." "You turned a pride into a team." "I turned a team into a pride," Sarah corrected. "The capacity was always there. They just needed someone to show them how to use it." The cubs had grown substantially over the past weeks. Rakar now weighed over 90 kilograms. Thys was lean muscle and speed. Ven had developed the focused intensity of someone who saw too much. Sora, while still the smallest, had tripled her original size. They were becoming adult creche, and adult creche were formidable predators. But they weren't aggressive. They weren't territorial toward visitors. They'd learned to channel those instincts into their roles. Rakar would assess visitors, determine threat level, and adjust his positioning accordingly. Thys would scout any new person entering the habitat. Ven would cross-reference them against colony databases. Sora would monitor Sarah's reaction to determine if the visitor was welcome. They were professionals. 3 months after Sarah had found them, representatives from the creche assembly arrived at the colony. The assembly was the closest thing the creche had to a central government, a coalition of major pride leaders who coordinated between clans. Matriarch Cheryl was old for a creche, her golden fur streaked with silver. She arrived with 2 younger warriors and an advisor. Sarah met them in the colony's main conference room, with Security Chief Morrison present. "Dr. Chen," Cheryl began, her galactic common accented but clear. "We have received reports about 4 creche cubs in your care. Cubs who should have been returned to our people." Sarah kept her voice level. "The cubs were orphaned. I saved their lives." "You took them from their culture, from their kind." Cheryl's tail lashed once. "We want to see them." They walked to Sarah's habitat in tense silence. When they entered, the cubs were in position. Rakar stood by the door watching the visitors with careful attention. Thys was near but not threatening, positioned where she could intercept any threat to Sarah. Ven monitored from his station. Sora stayed close to Sarah, medical scanner active. Cheryl stopped, staring. Her warriors flanked her, clearly confused by what they were seeing. "These cubs work together," Cheryl said slowly, "without challenging, without fighting." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "Impossible. Young males establish dominance through combat. Females compete for territory. This is our nature." Sarah gestured to her cubs. "Watch." She pulled up a security alert, a minor one, a delivery drone approaching the habitat. Immediately, the cubs activated. Ven identified the drone and its authorization. Thys moved to intercept, checking for any irregularities. Rakar positioned himself between the door and Sarah. Sora prepared emergency supplies in case the situation escalated. The drone was legitimate. they stood down. The entire sequence took less than 30 seconds and involved zero aggression between the cubs. Sharal's ears were flat against her skull, not in anger, in shock. "How?" she demanded. "How did you stop them from fighting?" "I didn't stop them," Sarah said. "I redirected them. They weren't fighting because they hated each other. They were fighting because they all wanted the same thing, the right to protect me. I gave them different ways to do it." She explained the system, the roles, the specializations, how each cub had found purpose in being the best at their specific function rather than the strongest overall. Sharal listened, her expression unreadable. When Sarah finished, the matriarch approached Rakar. The big cub tensed, but didn't move from his position. "You guard the perimeter," Sharal said. "Why do you not stand beside your human? That is the position of highest honor." Rakar rumbled, a deep sound in his chest. He glanced at Sarah, who nodded permission to respond. "The door is the first defense," Rakar said in halting Galactic common. "Nothing reaches her if it cannot pass me. Sora stands beside her because that is Sora's strength. My strength is here." Sharal turned to Thys. "You scout. You roam far from your pride. Does this not feel like exile?" "I see threats before they arrive," Thys replied, her voice sharp with pride. "The others cannot move freely because I have already cleared the path. My speed serves the pride." Ven spoke without being asked. "I watch what others miss. Information is my weapon." Sora simply looked up at Sarah with complete devotion. "I keep her well." Sharal backed away slowly. She conferred with her warriors in the Kresh language, speaking too quickly for Sarah to follow. Finally, she turned back. "Dr. Chen, what you have done here challenges everything we understand about our own nature. These cubs display coordination we do not see even in trained adult warriors. They have specialized in ways that would take years to develop in our society. Because you force them to compete," Sarah said gently. "You make them spend so much energy establishing dominance that they never develop beyond being strong. These cubs didn't have that distraction. They had purpose from the beginning. You taught them to be human," Sharal said. It wasn't quite an accusation. "No, I taught them to be a team. That's what humans are good at. We're not the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest, but we're really good at figuring out how to make everyone's strengths matter. How to build systems where cooperation beats competition." Sharal was quiet for a long moment. "The cubs should return with us, to our homeworld, to learn our ways." Sarah felt her chest tighten, but she'd known this was coming. She looked at each of her cubs. They'd grown so much, become so capable. "That's not my decision," Sarah said. "It's theirs." Sharal's eyes widened. "You would let juveniles choose? They're not mindless animals. They're people. They deserve a choice about their own lives." Sarah turned to the cubs. "The matriarch is offering to take you home, to the Kresh homeworld. You'd be with your own kind, learn your culture, join traditional prides, or you can stay here with me as we are now. I won't force you either way." Rakar spoke first. "Will there be perimeters to guard on the homeworld?" "There are territories to defend," Sharal said, clearly thrown by the question. "I guard Sarah's perimeter," Rakar said simply. "This is my position. I am good at it." Thys was more direct. "Will I be forced to fight for rank?" "That is our way," Sharal said. "This is my way," Thys replied, gesturing to the habitat. "I scout. I clear threats. No one scouts better than me here. If I went there, I would waste time fighting instead of scouting." Ven didn't even look up from his monitors. "I am the pride's intelligence. This is my function." Sora simply pressed closer to Sarah. Sharal looked at the 4 cubs, then at Sarah. Something like understanding crossed her face. "They are not choosing you over their species. They are choosing their roles over uncertainty." "They're choosing purpose," Sarah said. "We gave each other that." The matriarch was silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke. The creche assembly will be very interested in this. What you have created here, it suggests possibilities we have not considered. That specialization might be chosen rather than determined by strength alone. That cooperation could be taught rather than beaten into submission. She gestured to her warriors. We will leave them with you. For now. But we will be watching, Dr. Chen. This pride of yours. It is something new. Something that should not exist according to everything we know. Maybe, Sarah said. You don't know everything yet? Charal almost smiled. Perhaps not. Perhaps humans have something to teach us after all. After the creche delegation left, Sarah sat with her cubs. They gathered around her, each in their preferred position, and for the first time in months, she felt completely at peace. Thank you, she said quietly, for choosing to stay. Rakar rumbled contentedly. Theis's tail swished in satisfaction. Ven's ears were forward and alert. Sora purred, a sound that vibrated through Sarah's entire body. They weren't a traditional pride, they might never be, but they were something better, something new. For Kresh, who'd learned that strength came in many forms, and that the strongest thing of all was choosing to build something together rather than tearing each other apart to stand alone. They were proof that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't technology or warfare or exploration. It was the simple, radical idea that everyone's strength mattered, that cooperation could be stronger than dominance, and that purpose was more powerful than pride. They were a pride that had found purpose, and in doing so, they'd become something the galaxy had never seen before. They'd become family.